Welcome to the Digible Dudes podcast. I'm David.
Yeah, I'm Reid.
And Reid, I wanted to make some joke about breaking news on this podcast because but I got no ammo. But we just had we were just joking at the end of the podcast about how Jason Dalka, who's the guest we're going to interview today, an apartment locator, he informed us of some co-star news that we didn't know about, and I said I wasn't aware because I hadn't heard it on the podcast yet. So, guess we'll save that for another time, and I'll leave this bad joke in there. Which, as you heard in the meeting earlier today, Reid, Nicole said I was on a freaking roll this weekend with the dad jokes. I feel like you're right. I am preparing for like fatherhood. Like I was just cracking them off left and right.
You have a natural gift, definitely, and I feel bad, and in a way, I also think it'll be entertaining for your kids. But you'll also throw in random stuff like bollocks, and I'm trying to think of some of your other strange, like British humor. So you have this unique slant to dad humor that will bring in, bizarre vocabulary or a whole new lexicon. So it will be very entertaining for me as you guys go through parenthood. And the breaking news, I mean, shit, for us, 8 days is breaking news, I guess. I mean, I don't know if you were pointing to that whole SEC thing, but or FTC, whatever, with RentPath and CoStar, but I can't believe that slipped through us. But nobody else seems to be talking about it. So we'll say we're breaking the news.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll do a follow-up podcast on this. But yeah, Jason just told us that the FTC is trying to block the CoStar RentPath acquisition. We don't have much more details than that because he told us about 6 minutes ago, and there's plenty to read there about it.
This also just in, RentPath has changed its logo to a cockroach.
You'll never kill me. Well, on the dad joke thing, back for a second, you know what one of my fears is here is that, and I don't know if this has happened to you. This is what I'm going to ask, but I fear like there are certain words that I make up or say improperly because I think it's funny to mispronounce it, and I feel like my children would learn that and then go to school and think that they have a high vocabulary, and someone's like, "Come on, don't you know that's not even a real word?" Or "I can't believe you said it that way." So, has that happened in your household?
Not that I'm aware of, but it wouldn't surprise me. Especially with the youngest, she picks up on that stuff a lot quicker and is more inclined to flash some of that dad vocab, with her friends. Whereas I think Ella and Avery always kind of have one eyebrow raised when I'm talking to them and say weird words. So I don't think they're as quick to run with it. So I'll see if
the one that comes to mind that I feel like is gonna just hose my child is pantaloons or pantaloons. Like whenever I'm looking for my pants, I'm like, "Where are my pantaloons?"
Oh my God, I've heard you say that. There's some word that I used very liberally when I was up at CBS. It was a blend of deceitful and devious. It was
Deceivious.
That, yeah. Holy cow!
It sounds like a Harry Potter spell.
Yeah. And I didn't even know I was doing it. And one of my buddies up there, Matt Hobbs, loved that guy. He at some point started to, I guess, feel sorry for me because the joke had gotten so big behind my back. And we went and had sushi for lunch, and he was like, "I need to tell you something. Deceivious is not a word." And I was like, "What the hell are you talking about? Where did that come from?" And he's like, "You only say it every other word, like when you get up in front of the staff." I was like, "What?" And why would I be using that word that much anyway? So it totally caught me off guard, but that one I'm aware of. So nobody in the family has heard that.
I can actually imagine you changing your voice, kind of like you did the Austin Powers, Mr. Evil.
Right. Pinky to the corner of the mouth. It's very deceivious.
Yeah. Wow, that's a good one. Oh man. Well, in today's episode, we have a conversation with, as we were saying, Jason Dalka, who runs Square One Real Estate, a locator and real estate company based out of Chicago. They work with, I think he said 200 to 220 properties in the downtown area. And I mean, this guy, I think he said he'd been doing it 11 years as a locator, but he really knows his stuff, like about that end of the business. I've talked to a couple locators before, and I mean, it's usually like I don't know. They're just not very. They can't really explain the business very well to me. But he really. I mean, I'm sure we could have gone 2.5 hours if we wanted to, trying to learn everything about it. But what are some of your big takeaways?
Well, I did think he was great, and as a founder, we hopefully have higher expectations on being able to explain the business model. A simple one that he did qualify being biased because it's been his career, but is that he doesn't anticipate a huge disruption in that space, at least for the foreseeable future. And went as far as to say, in great comparison, we'll remember that one for a little while, to the supernova. But basically, before the star implodes, it expands. And so he sees the change in the housing industry lending to that, where way more folks are looking for apartments, and that should spell kind of a prolonged or protracted horizon for the locators. My response to that was, only if you guys get serious about your marketing strategy. And he said it's far from a science, and it's more kind of bottoms up and still very network based, which I get, but I'd be really curious to see somebody with deeper pockets try to tap into that.
Yeah, I mean, that's originally actually how we got hooked up with Jason. He had come across to talk to us about some marketing, and I was nervous about taking it. We just don't have the capacity at the moment. But to your point, like if you're willing to do some test and learn, it seems like there's some great opportunity there. Particularly when he was saying some of those properties in Chicago are willing to pay 3 months rent as a commission. I mean, that gives you a lot of dollars to try to play with. I mean, we didn't get into how much of the commission he has to pay each of his folks, like what the overhead's like. But even if you could commit, let's say 3/4 of a month rent, I feel pretty confident that you could come back positive. And then if you really start to optimize, I feel like you could get underneath. I mean, really, for a few $100, obviously, you could probably end up getting your sales done.
Yeah, and I would assume there'd be, a couple different, there would be room for a couple different big um players to enter, meaning why wouldn't you have like the Target versus like the Costco versus more, the luxury firms, right? So it's like the 3 months, there's some that could make a living off that, maybe do extremely well by it, but then a real disruptor would be somebody, I'll just use an Amazon, to come into the picture and do that in a much more supportive cost structure for the owners. And then it's like, well, instead of parting with 3 months, we have a different arrangement. And I'm saying I'd look for some creativity. It's not as simple as just is it 1 month or three. And I can't spell that out right now, but I just think that would be fascinating to try and innovate a little bit on what the structure looks like if you had somebody big come into the industry.
Yeah, well, I loved both his and your angle that you guys were kind of building off of each other. But I think he said, what if CoStar came in or whatever? That was part of your thread with him. But what if one of the big players came in and decided to do a concierge service, and that he recommended Very, apts.com, and they have a concierge service on placement. But one of these upstarts, like Apartment List, for example, I mean, that makes total sense to me that they could build that into their model, saying like, hey, we have a dedicated person by phone, even that you could like that will act, as you were saying, Reid, as your virtual assistant. They'll work off of your calendar to get this like scheduled and find the placement. I mean, now. I mean, I think Apartment List already has an interesting model, but if you threw that on top of it, and then you leverage their, as you're saying, their marketing power from their rankings and their paid spend, I feel like that could be really interesting, particularly because what they could do is start to network with different locators in each of the major markets that he was describing, like in the four Texas markets and Chicago. But you could do some bubble testing, right? And you could be like, hey, you could have the Apartment List person via phone at some centralized center, but then they could also like partner up with a local locator if they actually wanted to kind of do the showings and not have to hire in the area. You're just cobbling together kind of like a service magic or something, like the best folks in the area.
Totally. It's amazing to me, though. My guess is why you won't see Apartment List do that is, and I hope this isn't true, and you and I don't know their founders or obviously, I guess, any of the main decision makers, but it seems that they're going to be another example, but different version of a co-star that is so intent on clinging to their current model. And yes, I'll give them credit for being I don't know if I could even say it's more progressive, but their platform's certainly, different. And that's why they've been so successful. But where I'm going with this is, instead of, fighting and trying to box out other trends, or even maybe what we would call a fading, trend, they are so intent on holding their margins, their model. And I don't want to sound contradictory, hypocritical, because you and I talk about the hedgehog, and all these examples of, great businesses should kind of stay in their lanes. Typically, that's the way to go. And there's obviously examples, and maybe more lately, of people having success outside of that. But I don't see this as veering too far out of that. And a good example of this with CoStar, as they pour more and more money into their paid media, is they don't really do much with paid media. And frankly, we should be grateful. RentPath is dabbling, I'll say, with paid search. CoStar's dabbling with social and some other stuff. But, I don't think I would be unfair to say they're far from where they need to be legitimate, like, and competitive. And the reason they're not wanting to put a lot of resources there is lack of familiarity, and also what's perceived to not be a business model that can compete or would be able to line up with what they're used to. And some of that's, I'm sure, with shareholders and things like that. It gets more complicated. But, again, and I'll say selfishly, with me and you, I love that we're willing to lean into areas we don't necessarily make as much money, because we're willing to pursue a bigger picture and be in it for a longer race. And I think you call out a great opportunity for Apartment List, but I'm willing to bet quite a bit that they steer clear of that.
Yeah, well, it also depends on who their financiers are, right?
Right.
Because
Right.
some of those, like, venture firms believe in playing that Amazon long game, and then others are like, nope, we need, by now we need you heading the other direction, because we got to return to our LPs in the fund in 10 years, right? Whatever, total of a 10-year timeline. And so some of that time compression really can kill those pivots.
Well, you look at, like, I mean, there's too many examples, but the big one that so many people point to as far as lack of, like, I guess, foresight is Polaroid. And, you know, even if it would have been a huge disruption, which it would have been, meaning financially, the economics of that, trying to make that transition, I don't know. I mean, we'll never know. Nobody was, well, I guess there are plenty of books on it and stuff and articles, but what was really the thinking? How could they have not seen it? And I look at CoStar, I look at apartments.com, and you and I have talked about it a million times. And I don't remember the last podcast we had about how we build an ILS, but how could you not move to some sort of performance-based model? And for me, I do look at it as some sort of engagement-based, performance model, not as all the way down to a Apartment List or a Zillow on a paper lease. Like, live in the middle. You got enough clients, you got enough clout, you got the advertising, you got the financiers, and become the Google before Google undresses you and does that for you. Like, as soon as they make the move into the space that they did with hotels, CoStar is going to be left in a very precarious spot, relatively speaking. So obviously I'm ranting now, and we could turn this into another podcast, but it all started kind of with this conversation, with Jason, that got us here. So it's good stuff.
Yeah. Well, if you want to learn more about locators, then this is the episode to listen to. But I learned a ton, because I did not know a lot going in, and even if I had, I feel like I would have gotten some takeaways out of it.
Yeah, no doubt.
All right, well, stay tuned. Okay, we're here with Jason Dalka. Jason, you're the founder of, well, shoot, I guess it's Luxury Rentals, right? Or Square One Real Estate, but Luxury Rentals.
Correct.
All right, great. Well, why don't you give us a little bit of background on the company? I think, if I remember correctly, you're still in startup mode. a little bit, but give us a little bit of your history and what brought you to found Square One Real Estate, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah. So I've been in the business for just about 11 years now. This is my second endeavor on the, brokerage / team side of things. I owned a brokerage for about 9 years, relatively successful. Unfortunately, they just closed their doors about a week ago. That was a new development since the last time we talked, which has been somewhat beneficial for us. But, grew that from, myself and a co-founder and one agent to about 70 agents. And I think at one point we had about 14 or 15 full-time staff. Say they were acquired by Zumper about 2 years ago. And, after my, brief non-compete ran out, I founded Square One, and a little bit different focus for us than what we were doing at the other company. Other company focused a lot on the neighborhood rentals, and we went straight into the downtown market. We are now back in the neighborhoods as well, but, really enjoy the downtown high-rise market. So, currently we are part of Keller Williams. We're a team within Keller Williams, and I want to say we have 15 agents and 2 full-time staff at the moment.
Got it. And based out of Chicago, and from my notes I had is that you guys work with 200 properties or so in the Chicago area?
Yeah, there's about 200, 220, high-rise properties downtown, and then there's some mid-rise stuff that's gone up in the neighborhoods that are a similar business model where they have the on-site leasing office, really that, luxury type mid-rise.
Got it. And the brokerage, not to go too deep into that, but that was purchased by Zumper. What would Zumper want with a brokerage?
What was the sales pitch, or what was the ultimate goal?
Well, I guess that's both. So it sounds like maybe again, you can don't have to go very far if you don't want to, but always just curious about that particularly because I hadn't heard of any Zumper acquisitions yet, so I missed that one.
Yeah, so they, I think the goal, originally, and it kind of, changed over the course of time, but we probably had one of the most extensive landlord databases in the city, and with their acquisition of the former company, they got all those contacts, so they could sell their advertising products to the different landlords. They really, the lead generation was the thing that attracted us to them, and it seemed like a really good fit at the time. I think as time went on, just looking, obviously I wasn't involved in it, any longer, but looking at it from, afar, as well as with the, relationships that I still had over there, I think what they ended up trying to do was they really tried to cut the broker or the locator out of the equation, the agent. And I don't think that's a recipe for success. I mean, sure, do I have an inherent bias in that? I do, but in general, the idea that somebody is going to rent an apartment the same way that they rent an Airbnb on, online, it happens. We saw it happen a little bit more during the really rough part of COVID, but in general, I don't think that's the way people want to do it. They actually want to see the spaces that they're going to live in, and making those decisions off of videos and floor plans and really great photos. I still don't think the market's there yet.
Yeah. Well, I can already tell this is going to be a super interesting conversation, at least for the party of one of myself. But before I sort of like skip ahead, why don't you talk us through then, sticking on the locator side, and I know you guys have a real estate sales business as well, so I want to get into that kind of a little bit later on, but sticking on the locator side, why don't you walk us through the past, present, future of locators? I mean, Reid and I, we have, I don't know, 3 years or something about hearing about locators, and we haven't ever worked directly with one. So we're pretty amateur when it comes to this, but super curious to get your take on it, being that that's your niche.
Sure. I don't think it's a business model that exists in a whole lot of places yet. I think we'll see that change over the next, handful of years here. But in Chicago, it's been around for about 25, 30 years. Mostly, again, neighborhoods and downtown on both sides of that equation, they exist. Before I got into the business, it was really people would line up on a Saturday afternoon in front of the office to go out and see apartments. Anything that was vacant, they would go out and show it. The business then went through and this was kind of when I got into it. It was very reliant on Craigslist. Backpage, if you remember those guys, anywhere where you could actually post a listing for an apartment, there were battles. I mean, you'd have one agent in the office posting a great 3-bedroom apartment, and 5 minutes later, somebody else was posting it, so that they could climb up and be higher on the Craigslist results. And then the market started to shift more to the ILSs. So your Zillows, your Hotpads, that whole Zillow family, PadMapper, RadPad, Zumper, Rent.com, ForRent.com, Apartments.com, you name it, they're all out there. And those are just the ones that I can think of off the top of my head. I think there's probably 100 or so that we quote unquote syndicate to. But most of them have no traffic as far as I can tell. So, and that's where the business is at right now. It's pretty much dominated by the ILS listings, and that has its pluses and minuses.
Well, I'm going to let Reid ask a question here in a second, but I got to ask then, what is the problem that the locator is solving? I'm surprised 25 years. I would have figured, I don't know, 50 years. I don't know. I just would have figured it was older, but yeah, exactly. What is the problem it's solving? Is it because multifamily apartments don't have a good enough channel to kind of fill their need, and thus locators were developed to fill that need? But yet they still haven't been able to wean off because the marketing, let's say, is not as perfect as they like to think it is. And I just say that wean off because typically the business model that we've heard has been locators are more costly than if you have a great marketing campaign. But I'm sure you might take umbrage with that, right? So I'm curious, what need is it solving? Why do you think why does it exist?
I think the biggest part of the need that it solves is actually on the consumer side. Again, we approach this from two different kind of markets that we serve. The downtown Class A luxury high-rise elevator buildings, and then the neighborhood stuff. The problem that we solve for the consumer on both sides is we act as a filter. It's basically a filter and a time saver. So, we can filter, specifically in the downtown market, we can filter your options from 220 properties to, 7 to 10 that fit your needs in 5 minutes. And then, after we filtered that down and you've decided, hey, these are the top 3 or 4 that I want to take a look at, then we're the ones that do all the scheduling. So we schedule the properties, or schedule the tours. We tend to have decent relationships with the buildings. So, if your general consumer decides they want to go see a place at 1:30 on a Saturday and the building is booked up, there's a really good chance that, we've got a good relationship. They know we bring great clients to the table, and we can get them squeezed in at that 1:30 mark because there's a greater likelihood that our client's going to close than the client that's walking in off the street or answered an ad on Apartments.com. And the other thing is, I think you guys are familiar with the statistic, but it's like 46 or 47% of all inquiries go unanswered at the building level. So, do some fall through the cracks over here? Sure. But our agents are much more incentivized to get back in touch with everybody because we're purely commission. When you've got a leasing agent in the building making 40 or 50 grand, to just kind of be there, I don't know where the motivation is. I know that they get a small bonus for actually filling a unit, but for our people, that's the entire, that's their entire paycheck. And we have to prioritize our time. So the people that we're bringing to a building, we tend not to just throw stuff against the wall and see if it sticks. We know for a fact that they're qualified, that what we're bringing them or what we're taking them to see fits their criteria to a T. And it's not just the how many bedrooms, how many bathrooms, pet-friendly parking, how much it costs. Those are things that they get from just about any website. It's the intangible stuff that we're able to match them up with, where I think our real value is, in bringing them to the buildings. For the client, it's the simplicity of having one contact. It's, if you're a client who's going out and, wants to see 4, 5, 6 properties, that might take you 3, 4, 5 days. We can usually get it done in 3 to 4 hours. So there's there's definitely a convenience factor that a lot of the, prospective tenants like.
Well, Reid, I feel like I could go all day right now. I have like 100 questions, but I don't want to bogart. So I'll let you start.
Sorry, David.
Oh, Reid's muted himself.
Here we go.
Look, he learned how to use Squadcast.
I'm between howls. Yeah, I've learned to mute and unmute. I'm well on my way here, David. Yeah, I have probably 100 as well. So I don't know how much would be overlap, but I appreciate you giving me a chance to use my mic here. So I'm curious, what's the arrangement that you have? You mentioned 200 buildings. And with the single family, you have the MLS obviously, and you have some listings that are exclusive and others that are shared. So how does that work for you guys? Are you one of a few brokers for these properties, or do you typically have exclusivity? And then how soon are they, I guess, engaging with you? Like how much is coming from the property versus you trying to build up your pipeline directly through the consumer?
Okay, so I don't know if this is how it is in every market, but in Chicago we are pretty much an open listing market. So let's say that there's maybe 30 to 40 different locating outfits in Chicago, ranging from shops that have 25, 30, 35 agents in them, all the way down to single person, single agent shops. For the most part, if you're a licensed broker that has some relationship with the building, they'll give you their listings in the downtown market specifically. The neighborhoods gets a little bit different. Those relationships tend to be much more semi-exclusive or exclusive than being completely open. And if you think about the model for a second, the neighborhood properties, we tend to be showing occupied units. Vacancy is the killer of cash flow. So we're doing our best to fill those properties before they go vacant. And most landlords don't want 100 different people running through through an occupied apartment. So those relationships tend to be a little bit more exclusive, semi-exclusive. Downtown, since you have the gatekeeper of the property manager, leasing agent at the building, they tend to work with just about everybody. It's more of we'll give you the opportunity, and you try not to screw it up, because there are people that get banned and the listings get taken away from them and they don't have access any longer. But for the most part, it's if you're licensed, they'll give you the listings, and then you have to do something to get them taken away.
I will definitely have to save room for some of the download on the blacklist brokers. That sounds really intriguing. I was somewhat of a, direct follow-up here, but you mentioned that you guys, one of the value propositions you provide is that in a matter of minutes, you can help somebody get down to 5 to 7 properties. And I'm sure that's where a Zumper, since we talked about them, and several of these other ILSs say they're capable of doing the same thing in 5 seconds, which I think we hopefully all can appreciate the obvious differences between the two. But the question in this is, how far along are your clients typically when they do come to you? How many are, just blue sky, versus, hey, I've already done my homework and I'm more interested in you scheduling things for me. I don't know if there's negotiation as part of the value proposition. Typically, I don't think that happens all that much, at the property level with leasing agents, but I could be wrong there. But it would just seem, if I were to engage, and certainly I did on the single family before we got a realtor, we had already done quite a bit of homework. So just curious how, from a percentage standpoint, how far down the road they are before you typically work with a client.
Reid, I think it depends on where they come from, to be honest. So the ILSs tend to be more bottom of the funnel activity. They want somebody who can, schedule, somebody who has access to the units. A lot of times they've made multiple attempts to call a building and haven't got an answer. You think about how apartments.com functions, or forrent.com, where they really send inquiries to a call center before they actually get to the property itself. But the clients that are coming from the ILSs tend to be really more that bottom of the funnel type lead. The ones that are coming from, your Craigslist, your, PPC efforts, Facebook, those tend to be further out. The ones that are further out, we can establish more of a value proposition with them. The ones that are, further down the funnel, they want to get into the property. Sometimes they're looking for our opinions on them. Is this a good deal? Is there anything else that I don't know about that I'm not seeing online? Those type of things. But a lot of times it is, hey, I want to see property X, Y, or Z. And then one of the things that we tend to do on our side is, find out what else they've seen, where they're at in the process. Have they seen other properties? Are they in town? Are they familiar with neighborhoods? Can we show them other properties is the big one. That's where we want, our agents want multiple, swings at the plate. They want multiple bites at the apple, however you want to, whatever analogy you want to use. We don't want to do one and done. It just, lessens our chance of actually getting a closing out of it. So, that's the goal when we get somebody that's further down the pipeline, is just to really find out where they're at, what they've seen, and what, how we can serve them besides, scheduling an appointment and getting them through the door.
Cool.
Well, I'm wondering about business model. So maybe this will wrap back around to Reid's question. But how is Chicago typical with other, I guess, markets, or do you think it's unique when it comes to the business model for locators? And if you could walk us through that, then we'll talk about how you acquire the customers.
Sure. I think Chicago is probably pretty typical to other markets that employ the locator model. Okay. We tend to earn 1 month's commission for placing a tenant. And that's on top of whatever incentives the building is offering to the tenant themselves. Right now, it's actually a little crazy. There's certain buildings that are giving away 3 months commission on top of the 3 months plus 6 months of parking that they're giving away to the tenants. So it's a little nuts right now. But typically, it's somewhere between 75% and 150%, depending on occupancy, traffic. That's kind of where that part of the business model falls. As far as how we acquire clients, it is across the board. The ILSs are becoming harder and harder to work with from our perspective. So our business model shifts. We try to get people higher in the funnel, nurture them for longer, show them that value proposition, and really, what's the word I'm using? we're really trying to get them to just work with us, to not go to the building, to not, reach out to 4 other agents who are going to show them the exact same thing.
Yeah, so you're getting most of the you're getting most of the consumers then from the ILSs by being able to syndicate that. And the reason in a way you exist is because the building isn't so good at capturing all the leads. They have a lot of other stuff happening, and they're, as you said, they're not super incentivized to provide the best client experience. And so you guys have a leg up on them when it comes to that angle for the consumer, thus a better close rate, and can help make up someone's number when they're not really focused on leasing.
Correct. Yeah. And, most of the downtown buildings, block us from actually advertising on those platforms, at least on the big ones. So some have a little bit more flexibility on like the second tier ILSs, but pretty much if we can syndicate to it on the downtown side, either the ILS itself blocks us from doing that because they have a paid customer in the building, or the building should actually forbid us from advertising there.
Mm-hmm. Sorry, Reid, for stepping on top of you there. I didn't see you unmute from the saxophone. I mean, maybe we should just let you let your daughter play the saxophone into the mic. It's your chance.
It could be a nice soundtrack. Some kind of, I don't know. I want to be nice here because I am her dad, but hopefully identifiable holiday tunes. Yeah, I was going to ask a similar question, which you just did. I wanted to unpack a little more of that relationship with the ILSs. It sounds like you made that pretty clear. The bigger ones are harder to work with, and the tier 2s is what you typically have a little bit better success or better relationship with. So I'm also curious, like, as far as the profile of like those properties you mentioned, luxury, we think fair or not, I guess, in terms of like pretty simple, like high rise, mid rise, garden style, like and then the larger PM companies or development companies versus obviously call it the mom and pops. So what's the sweet spot when you mentioned the 200 that you were working with in the prior firm? What's the profile of the property typically?
So those 200 to 220 downtown, the high rise, mid rise stuff, that's all your national companies. There's a couple of smaller firms in there, but not many. It's your Gray Stars, your Village Greens, your Amelie's, your Group Foxes, Trinity, Lincoln Property Company. Those are the big ones. So, as far as the neighborhood stuff, that's where we can get a little bit more focused on where we can actually help an owner out. The sweet spot for us on that side of the equation is really the guy who, it's not your mom and pop landlord. If you own a 4-flat here in Chicago and you live in one unit and rent out the other 3, you can probably handle that on your own. Now, do you want to? Not everybody does, but you could handle it. Where we really excel in the neighborhood market is kind of that intentional investor, the one who, owns somewhere between 25 and 400 or 500 units. They can't do it themselves. A lot of times they have a full-time job, whether it's still a pre-real estate career or whether the running of the actual real estate portfolio doesn't allow them to do the leasing any longer. Those are the ones that we really feel we can add the most value to. And those are the ones that, for us are the big fish clients. They don't have an in-house leasing staff. If they do anything in-house, they're relying on, engineers. And this is a little stereotypical here in Chicago, but half the time the engineers don't speak, fluent English. So it's really tough to get the renter across the finish line if you really can't communicate that well, what the value of the property is. That's, and some engineers are scary. So, but that's the sweet spot for us in the neighborhoods, is those 25 to, several hundred units. Those are the ones that we can really do the most work for.
And then lease ups, I assume, are like the golden goose, like versus dealing with a lot less inventory with more stabilized assets.
See, lease ups are a mixed bag. We haven't done many of them. We have 2 of them right now. Smaller.
Surprising.
What's that?
I just said that's surprising because you mentioned, they're looking, they don't want to disrupt, occupied units as much, and certainly even stabilized has the natural churn, so you still have inventory to work with. But I would have assumed that locators would be all over and the properties as well, like, because our experience, at least on the digital marketing side, is like that's where they have the most cash to spend and they're the most aggressive. So I could see them deploying all tactics. It's like we're gonna do the ILSs, we're gonna do Google, Facebook, and we're gonna tap some locators. Just go all in to get this sucker stabilized as quick as possible.
Right.
So it surprises me a little bit. You'd say you don't work as much with the lease ups.
What we've seen over here, anyhow, is on the bigger lease ups. I don't know how familiar you guys are with franchise operations, and when they're opening like a new restaurant in a new area. They will tend to bring in like a startup team to implement the systems, to hire the people to really get that restaurant up and running. That seems to be the model with the lease ups too. There are now teams that will go from market to market, and they'll basically fulfill the same roles that tend to exist in a large building. So, it's mostly lease-up staff or leasing agents, but you do have somebody, in that property manager role. But yeah, they'll send 4 or 5 people in to do a lease-up, and they'll move from here to Minneapolis to Denver to wherever the next one is, and they're really focused on just leasing up that specific property.
Interesting. David, can I squeeze one more in?
Yeah.
In building the business you're working on now, and the business that you left that had what sounded like quite a bit of success, at least for the first half of its tenure, do you put a higher priority on building or like the relationships with the properties? So back again to the 200 versus direct to consumer, that's happening through ILSs and other marketing channels. Because obviously, at the end of the day, consumers are your top priority and first. Just leave it at that. But on the other hand, if you're able to procure or secure like relationships with 400 or 500 properties, that may be a better strategy. So I didn't know how fluid that was, or if there's some sort of general percentage kind of in your head that you work around.
So, Reid, I think we look at them both as clients. They're both a client base that we have to serve well. And it is, as wrong as this sounds, it's an analogy that's worked for me over the years. There are different cogs in the machine. So the buildings and the properties are one big cog. The other cog is the brokerage or the agent that's involved. The renters themselves are, they're the oil that goes through the machine that keeps everything running. And, it's not that they don't matter to us, because our goal, especially in the new model at Square One, is to get those renters in, and then to maintain that relationship, if they want to rent again next year or the year after that. But at some point, we feel that the bulk of them are going to buy. And that's where that conversion and kind of nurturing that relationship comes into play for us. We want to make sure that, that at some point we have a chance of being your realtor for life, your agent for life. With the way people move around nowadays, is that always going to happen? It's not. But, for a bulk of the people that are in our market, we think that, each one of them is good for about 4 to 5 transactions over their life here in the city. If that's, 2 or 3 apartments and one sale, that's great. If it's, if it's 5, 6, 7 apartments, that's fine too. We really want to meet the client where they're at and, help them, meet their current needs rather than being focused on what our need is. Hey, we need to rent this apartment, or hey, we need to, sell this property. It's really more about, where the client is in their life cycle, what works for them, and helping them to, ascertain their best options.
Well, being a retailer for life, do you often deal with clients transitioning, from apartments or looking to transition into single family? And then is that something that you just have your own network that you refer off to, or do you guys ever actually, cross over?
Yeah, so that's actually the business model right now, Reid, is to cross over. We have agents that come in that will work on the leasing side for, 12, 18, 24 months. And then they want to move into the sales side of the equation. So, we're trying to get them there in a structured way so that, there are locators, the good ones, who can make, $80, $90, $100,000 a year renting apartments. And, your average real estate agent, makes 35 to 40 grand a year. So, the goal for us, and one of the challenges that we're facing at the moment, is how do you get somebody who's, even our average agents, an average agent can make 60 grand a year without, I don't want to say without effort. That's something, if they're working 35 to 40 hours a week, they can make 60 grand a year. But, how do you get them from that point and transition over to the sales side without taking a huge loss in income and really having to learn a completely different skill set? Because, leasing tends to be a little bit more reactive and sales tends to be a little bit more proactive as far as client acquisition and lead generation go. So, do we have it locked down now? We don't. Are we trying? Yeah, absolutely. We tend to try to move people through milestones. And once they've achieved all the milestones in the leasing program, then we feel they're ready on the sales side. That doesn't mean they're ever going to really abandon the leasing. It's always it's a nice way to keep your pipeline fresh, keep your sphere of influence growing. But, at some point they may very well grow out of the leasing side of the business. And that's our hope for them because, there's another crop of, kids coming out of college who want to get into real estate. Like, that's an actual career goal now. I don't know that it was 10, 15 years ago. But that's what we're trying to do for them on the agent side.
Cool. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
David,
Well, I just think it's super, super interesting of a business model. Is the reason, why not just stick with leasing? Like, why add the complication of the transitioning to to the sales side?
The agents that are in the business, they will all eventually want to either wash out of the business completely on the leasing side, or they will want to get into sales. There's no middle ground there. That's how it's worked, the entire time I've been in the business. You do have some leasing agents that come in and they end up, getting into they go from the brokerage side to the building side and vice versa. You'll see people on the building side that will transition over to the broker side. But yeah, most of them want to go into sales at some point. Yeah.
Is it because, you mentioned that the income doesn't start off as good on the sales side, or is it because if you nail the sales side, your network gets large enough, then the income is better? Or is it a prestige thing, or what is it that has everybody wanting to move to the sales side?
I think there is some prestige there, but it is income potential. You can definitely make more money on the sales side. It just takes a little bit longer to get there unless you have a really strong sphere of influence to start. and that's where the leasing can really be a great foundation for that. Your average sales agent, even if they're doing 2 or 3 open houses a weekend, they might come in contact with 15, 20 people a week. A leasing agent, on the other hand, can, if they're, in the summertime when we're peak season, they can come in contact with 15, 20 people a day sometimes. If you've got, if you have 3 to 5 showings on a Tuesday, and they're all 2 and 3 bed clients, you might very well have 2 or 3 roommates, a handful of parents that are coming along with you, and if your goal as a leasing agent is to build a significant sphere, and that you're going to be in this business for a long time, those are all people that you can continue to to get referral business from, to get repeat business from, reviews that drive a lot of traffic. You're just going to have more at bats on the leasing side in your first 2 years than you're ever going to have on the sales side.
Yeah, I mean, in a way, I feel like I would lean towards the leasing side myself if this was me starting over, because I love the consistency and the chances, and because most people, that 50% retention rate at most buildings, if I build the right relationship, they're going to come right back to me to find that next place.
Right.
So it just feels like a way more sustainable, like predictable income.
Mm-hmm.
But I get you on the volume of people like that. Some that wouldn't work for, but I love the stability of that volume versus like the, I've got a half dozen people that are looking at me for their home, but it could be this year, it could be 3 years.
Right.
Like that's rough. You mentioned that certain markets don't do locators. Why is Chicago set up as a market for locators? Why would a market not have locators? Like what are the conditions here for this to work out?
I think it's really based on density. Yeah, I think it's based on density. That's the biggest indicator that I can see. The markets that locators exist in right now, at any kind of real level, is you've got Chicago, New York, Boston, all 3 of the metros in 4 metros, I guess, in Texas. Denver has a couple. Atlanta has a handful. Miami's been relatively resistant, but there are a few kind of popping up there. The West Coast seems really resistant. I've got a friend in Los Angeles right now who wants to do it, but you look at drive times, you look at how spread out the city is. I can show, one of my people can show 4 places in a matter of 3 or 4 blocks. In other areas, it's a lot more spread out. I know it exists in Austin. Austin is much more it seems like there's much more of the kind of the garden complexes than there are here. But there's a ton of them in Texas, just, a boatload. So yeah, I think it really has to do with density. That's my, density and development.
So it sounds like not that you couldn't get a building to sign up with you, let's say in Los Angeles, right? It sounds like it's more of a harder viable business model for the locator company in these metros that have all the windshield time. Yeah,
I would definitely say it's harder. You have a lot of drive time. You've got obviously expense that goes into that. Texas has an interesting model. I've explored Texas a little bit. They have a 2-tiered pay structure. So if you actually attend the showing with the client, you'll get 100% of the commission, 100% of the first month's rent. If you just send the client to the leasing office, you'll get 50%, which obviously that I think that came from the fact that there is so much drive time down there. The properties are so spread out that an agent could spend 3 or 4 hours behind the driving in traffic. So here that doesn't happen. There's agents that exist in the downtown market who don't have cars, who Uber from showing to showing. I knew an agent probably right when I got into the business. It's probably the second place I ever landed as a brokerage. We have a neighborhood here called the Gold Coast, and if I had to guess, there's probably, at the time, there were probably 10 to 12 buildings in that neighborhood. Right now, there's probably 15 to 20. He lived in one of the downtown high rises. He met all of his clients at a Starbucks down there, ran his business out of the business center in the high rise that he lived in, and walked from building to building. I mean, he literally made $160,000 showing, 15, 20 buildings tops. And, that worked for him.
So what is the biggest challenge then as a locator? Because it sounds like, I mean, I would just venture to guess sounds like in your market, it's more getting the consumer.
It is.
But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's the biggest challenge. Lead generation, especially in the last 3 to 5 years, has been the biggest challenge. Even more so in the last year and a half to 2 years. That's, because again, we have all the listings. I mean, especially the downtown market, with rare exception, we can show a client everything that's in the market, from the Class A high-rise managed properties to the individual condo that, is listed on the MLS. We can show all of it. The only thing we can't show a client downtown that, is the, kind of that listing that may be posted as a flyer in the, in the laundry room or in the mail room at a condo building. We don't know it exists, but the client doesn't know it. They don't know it exists either. So it's not like, they feel like they're missing out on something. Neighborhoods it's a little bit different, because those are, I can have a courtyard building on one corner of the street and not have access to the courtyard building across the street.
Yeah, it's interesting, because I was going to say, before you said it was consumers was the issue. The way you were talking about the value prop, meaning saving time, convenience, whatever. It made me think like, well, shoot, could you ever get the consumer to pay the fee, or similar like sale real estate where they split it half and half? But now that you mentioned like, well, getting the consumers actually the hard part, then that means it's in a market like Chicago. It just sounds like, I guess, the property management companies, for better or worse, just have to continue to factor for this. And I'm like more sold. The way I'm thinking about the locator, after talking with you more, is I'm more sold on where it's a potential fit. So, for example, if we had a client that that's willing to put in a lot of sweat equity, is like going to work on their response time, their phone answering skills, they're going to really monitor their media, then in a way, like maybe a locator's not as much of a fit. But if you have a client that's more focused on, I guess, other operational aspects and doesn't want to spend that sweat equity and kind of wants back to what you said about convenience for themselves, or the easy button, then maybe then it makes sense to be a fit, to say, look, instead of dealing with 100 garbage leads and getting 2 or 3 good ones, you can deal with, let's say a half dozen locators. Make sure that they're like evangelists for you, and then they'll just handle it, and you can focus on other things.
Yes, absolutely. And, I mean, for the last 5 years, I think it's the last 5 years, I've actually lived in one of the downtown high rises. Well, I've lived in multiple downtown high rises. We may be getting off track here, but there are times where I don't honestly understand the rationale for having on-site leasing agents. And again, do I have a bias in that? Absolutely. But, what I see a lot of on-site leasing agents doing are not leasing agent activities. There are things that could be, you'll have leasing agents at certain buildings here that are dealing with lease preparation. They're fielding, tenant inquiries from the current tenants in the building. They're accepting packages from FedEx and UPS and Amazon. Those are not things that leasing agents need to be doing, or, that I think even, I don't want to say should be doing, but like I lived in one, and every day there was a property manager, an assistant manager, and at least 2 leasing agents, Monday through Friday. Saturday, there were probably 3 leasing agents in the office. And that's a whole lot of overhead. And, can those activities that, that the leasing agents are doing on a regular basis, could they be done more efficiently in a central hub for, one of the large property management companies? Yeah, there's no reason that, somebody needs to be on site filling out a lease. That can be done, from central ops somewhere. Our leasing agents, they do nothing but interact with the client because that's what they're good at. That's what we pay them to be good at. Somebody that has the ability to make, $150, $200 an hour, I don't need them doing, $10, $12, $15 an hour administrative work. And, and I see a lot of that at the buildings. I mean, you could, I think a case could be made that you could effectively use locators and get rid of, all of your full-time leasing agents.
Well, I'm going to jump in here. We have never gone 47 minutes, I think was the time stamp I caught when you said we might be getting a little off track. That's a personal record for us, Jason. So should just be happy. And I still, in fact, don't think you have gone off track. But we love the hot takes. In particular, David likes hearing opinions like that, and then unpacking that a little bit further. So we might want to do that here, but I want to squeeze this question in before I forget it. It's more about building a locating business, since you've done it a couple times, and us being founders, we're always intrigued by those stories, and you gave us some of that at the onset. But from a marketing perspective, building your brand, how much of that, I mean, do you have that kind of down to a formula at this point, or is it more fluid as far as how much is like grassroots versus the ILSs versus, you mentioned getting a little upstream with Google and Facebook. But my head's kind of swirling with ideas on how I'd go to market to try and get the word out. But I'll end here by saying, I was an apartment dweller for the first half of my adult life, and I never even considered an apartment locator. And it's not because I wouldn't have, it's because nobody told me to, so I don't know if you agree with that, but I still feel like there's a huge portion of the population that doesn't even know that that's really a viable option for them. And so from my perspective, that's good and bad, because you got a lot more people you can probably get in front of, but it's also for whatever reason, it's clearly must be a challenge. So, talk to us a little bit more about how you get a company off the ground and get the word out.
Yeah, so we definitely don't have it down to a science, Reid. That's for sure. The market is, over the last year and a half to 2 years, has really shifted under our feet. So, we're doing what we can to, kind of reinvent ourselves on the fly. But you're absolutely right. When it comes to people not knowing that this is an option and what the value that we bring, to the end user is, we can definitely do a better job. And that's one of those battles that we fight every day. How do we get the word out, to the consumer?
Well, and how transparent is it, Jason? Sorry to interrupt, but
sure.
More on the ILS end of things. So, for you guys to have listings, and forgive me, maybe I should know this and David does, but if I'm a consumer on Zumper and a locator has a listing, how quickly do I identify that, or is that identifiable versus I click on that where it says contact us or, set up an appointment, and that's when you introduce yourself and say, hey, I'm a third party locator, et cetera, et cetera. So hopefully that's not a dumb question, but I'm just curious how transparent that side of the kind of marketing and lead generation is.
it's really not that transparent at all, to be honest with you. It's it's nothing that I would say is trying to be hidden from the consumer. It's just if you look at some of the portals, some of the ILSs, that call to action button, that schedule a showing, that contact us.
Yeah,
that's always above the fold, and and then there's another call to action, 3/4 of the way down, and then finally at the very, very bottom, it will tell you who the listing agent is. Who's actually advertising that property. Sometimes it'll be the property management company. Sometimes it's specifically the owner or the landlord, and a lot of times it's a locator. Sometimes it's like a full blown sales agent who happens to get a rental listing. But yeah, it's not the very bottom.
Yeah, well, that was helpful. I appreciate the candor. And then, is there ever duplicate listings where the PM company is buying, let's say, a diamond on CoStar, and you come in, much lower, like on a silver or gold package, or they strictly prohibit any kind of duplicates?
Yes and no. So
now we're getting to the fun stuff.
Yeah, exactly. So there's been an effort over the last couple of years, and this is where I say things have gotten a little more difficult. There's been an effort to clean up the data from the ILS side. And obviously they want to monetize their traffic, which I completely understand as a business owner. So most of the time, whether it's there's a cutoff, whether it's 25 units or 50 units, depending on the ILS. If they won't sell the package to multiple people, it's basically they sell the address once. You control that address. Are there ways to manipulate the system? Sure. There's certain ILSs allow you just to put cross streets down. I know for a fact that other companies and other agents will put in the address of the building 3 doors down as an address, and the checking from the ILSs isn't sophisticated enough for most of them to catch that. If it's typically at most they're checking against USPS records, and if it's a legitimate address, then they tend to let it go through. That's gotten a little bit better and a little bit worse over the course of the last year and a half. It seemed like before they were more interested in enforcing that it was a legitimate address that you actually had, the rights to advertise. Now that like Zillow's, charging $9.99 a week or whatever to post a rental listing, it seems like they don't care. If it's not an address they've sold to somebody as a package, throw anything you want in there and pay your $9.99, it tends to go up. You'll see 123 Main Street -3 Southwest. That's one apartment. 123 Main Street 3 Front is the same apartment, but with a different moniker on it. So, people are getting creative again, and at $10 a week, somebody's happy to take the money.
Yeah, fascinating stuff. David, is that taking you back to a certain place you and I used to work at?
I actually didn't think about that. Reid's talking about we used to work for the Verizon phone book before we knew one another. But I hadn't thought about that, Reid. Go ahead and share.
Well, they had a huge pressure. We sold more of the online solutions. Jason, it's just a funny thing because Dave and I are almost 10 years apart, but we ironically started in a similar spot. I mean, he had a couple run-ins with some bout. I don't know why I'm saying bouts, but it was part of a couple startups. But spent a good amount of time there getting through school, and I spent the first few years of my career there. And they had what it's called non-ads. That's just the, inside term, I guess, but non-advertisers. And, you'd have these big quotas, and it was actually more devious than what you just talked about. But people would get very creative with addresses, like reselling, frankly, the same advertiser. And the advertisers started to get savvy with that too. And so it became a huge mess, like with the credit department, and you can imagine actually some pretty sizable commissions going out. And they basically needed like a black ops team to like figure it all out and like sort through it. So yeah, that was about 20 years ago, but I was getting a little bit of PTS as you were talking through that.
They're in Georgia right now trying to sort out the election.
Right, exactly. They'll be done in about 2 years.
Right.
Well, I gotta ask, what I guess, like, what keeps you up at night as a locator? Because it sounds like there's I really like a lot of the business model that you're talking about, and now, as I mentioned, I feel like I see the purpose of locators, and now I just kind of want to figure out how to make it work in every market. But what keeps you up at night? Because I have to imagine, even though you mentioned Zumper earlier on, Apartment List seems like it seems like they're the closest that wanting to take the locator online. Would you agree with that? And then, yeah, I mean, ultimately to the question, what keeps you up at night and has you worried about this industry?
I think that people have been trying to, the industry has been trying to cut out the agent, and this is real estate in general, for the past 25 or 30 years. Every new technology wave that comes through, it's the death of the agent. I see you laughing there. I don't know how you feel about it. I don't see it happening, at least not in my lifetime. So, will we see some commission compression? I'm sure we will. Will we see, on the sales side, will we see a split between, the buyer actually paying their half of the commission and the seller paying their half? Possibly. But agents going away, I'm going to be 49 in a couple of weeks here. And, I'm not worried about them going away in my lifetime. I just, like I said earlier.
Are you retiring next year, Jason?
Absolutely, Reid. I'm out. I wrote a paper back in college, and, they were talking about, brick and mortar versus click and order. And I just don't think for purchases as big as we're talking about, and if you think about an average purchase in a city like Chicago, it's a $12,000 to $36,000 purchase. It's not ordering a $50 box of whatever from Amazon. I just don't believe that people are going to make those decisions without physically seeing the properties if they can. That's my take on it. The sales side, same thing. I don't see people, making, $150,000, $350,000, $400,000, $500,000 purchase without having adequate representation and seeing the actual property, touching and feeling what they're going to be buying. I don't think that, I made the point in that paper in college that, Ford doesn't spend hundreds of thousands of dollars to figure out the sound of a door closing. If somebody can just go and, look at a picture on the internet and say, that's what I want, people are still, they're still people.
I think the question is the next generation. And I'll group my daughters there, actually twin 10-year-olds and a 7-year-old. Mm-hmm. And maybe, I could speak more to like the teens and folks in college. And that's where the question of this pandemic, like what lasting effects will it have? But, the isolation, working remotely, doing everything online. I mean, people, you're right, have been talking about click and order for several years now. But this has forced it. on a lot of people. And like you said, it's slowed down certainly for your business or your vertical, and a lot of others, as people are hesitant to get in close proximity to anyone else if they can avoid it. And so they're being forced, if they weren't already, leaning that direction, to manage their lives independently. And that may accelerate, some things that otherwise would have been more protracted, as to when we see it. I don't disagree with you. I mean, it's the classic, like, most people still like to try on a pair of shoes, but there's now gazillions of examples of people that are willing to go ahead and just buy and return. But that's not something you can do with to your point, a $30,000 purchase or $500,000 purchase. But what I do think will be interesting, and I talked to David a little bit about this a week or two ago, but is, the advent of the virtual assistant, because frankly, I would say we're still in the early stages of this. And as that matures and develops, what that could do as far as disrupting the apartment locating business, where in 10 years, it's all very interactive with your phone, and you don't need somebody right by your side. And some of this technology does in fact know how to get to that 5 to 7 every bit as quick, and has the intelligence and the connectivity with everything else that's on site to take you through that process without another human by you. And of course, there's also a big disruption happening with self-guided tours that are making similar arguments to what you're saying, Jason, which is you don't need to be forking out all that money for leasing agents, and a lot of people like the privacy of being able to tour an apartment by themselves or on the weekend off hours. And the close ratio looks pretty dang good. It's not like you're losing them. In fact, in many cases, they point to significantly higher close rates. So factoring for that kind of trend that's starting to emerge, and I think is gaining a lot of steam in conjunction with the virtual assistants maturing, that's where I see not a replacement of the traditional apartment locator, today's locator, but certainly it could very well eat into that space.
Yeah, no, I would agree with you there. I think that one of the problems with the current model is with the office-based leasing agents. We've seen a little bit of disruption. There's a couple of companies that are trying to do something about this, but one of the biggest challenges is that people have to take off work to go and see an apartment. The office is open from 9 to 5. I'm like, that makes no sense to me. It's just like, it's like the small shop owner in, on Main Street America who wants to work 9 to 5. Well, guess what? All of your clients, all the people, your customers, the ones who would be buying your goods, they're at work. You're an entrepreneur. You should be, I don't know if your normal business hours should be 12 to 8. I don't know, but self-guided tours, virtual showings, things like that will definitely eat into what we do. But I think one of the biggest things that's a challenge for them right now is that 9 to 5 kind of operation. You see some places they might be open till 6 or 7 on one night a week, but I know we would do a hell of a lot more business if, I think that's the first time I even came close to cussing on this thing, which is a rare.
That's also a record.
Yeah.
But
David stole that one. Yeah.
But yeah, if we had showing hours that were from 4 o'clock in the afternoon until 8 o'clock at night, we could stack showings. I mean, people just don't want to take off work to go tour a property. But every effort that I've made, trying to leverage our relationships to, one, get the opportunity where we can actually have a couple of late nights during the week. Nobody wants to do it. Giving us the ability to, because at least all of our buildings down here, they all have model units. So, I can see where some buildings or property management companies might be, averse to really just letting somebody, come in and take a look at the model unit. But if they're in the company of a licensed agent, I don't see why, we can't make an appointment at 7:00, meet the doorman, say, hey, we're here to see, the model unit, get the key and go up and, show the property. Because everything past that point can be done online. The, application, lease signing, deposits, all of those things. It's that physical, in-person showing that's difficult. But, again, I've made the request a couple of times and have been rebuffed every time.
Yeah. I'm super surprised by that. Maybe with some of these self-guided tours, you'll be able to break that. Meaning, if as they install these new systems and have the smart locks, maybe you could work something out where it's like, well, you're open anyways for these self-guided, so let us go through there and make sure we close this thing.
So there's actually a
go ahead.
company here in town. Well, they're in a couple different cities, but they're really kind of small right now. And their business model is actually renting an apartment, putting their agent in the apartment, and then trying to leverage access to show the properties after hours. I don't know if they're
Wow.
actually showing the property the agent is living in, or if they're showing the model units. But it's definitely an interesting take on it.
I love these bold things. That's what Reid was talking about earlier. Like that's a bold move to say, hey, part of your salary is going to be that free cost of living, but you have to be available and show units whenever. Super cool. Well, I know we have to wrap up here in a second, but I had one last thing. I don't know if Reid does that I wanted to ask about, but it was diving back into that future world. You started to talk about it a little bit, that you don't think it's agents are going anywhere, and I think I'd agree with you. I mean, I don't know if you've paid attention, but Redfin has been sued in a number of areas because of across the country because of the way that they tried to kill the agent by doing this flat rate model, and people feel that it's against fair housing, which I thought was super interesting. But I'm just for your back to your bold prediction about the future. Do you just see this is a market that's or type of business that's gonna slowly start to peter down? And what could cause it to eventually, I guess, die off after your lifetime? Or is it it's funny because Reid and I talk all the time about, because clients ask us, when do you think the ILSs are going to die? And yet you're almost like one step before the ILS, right? Because you're saying, hey, the ILS works, but people don't handle the leads they get well enough, thus you need to exist. And so before the ILSs can die, in a way, the locator would have to be killed off, right? Otherwise, how is the ILS ever gonna die off? So just bold prediction, like what could do it, and or is it just one of those things where it's like you're just always going to have brick and mortar stores, as you were saying?
I think you're always going to have brick and mortar stores, but I actually think this, I'm not a science guy, but if I remember, a little bit of my Star Trek or Star Wars type, sci-fi stuff, stars actually expand before they contract and collapse. Okay. So I think we're actually going to see an expansion of this model before it goes away. Okay. And my rationale for that is, for my entire, lifetime, the goal has been home ownership. It's been, it's the white picket fence. It's, buy your own place. I think we're seeing that, I won't say die, but it's definitely being, reinvented. So, I think we're going to get much closer to a 50-50 distribution of housing between rentals and sales over the next, 5 to 10 years. I think there's definitely a market for the rental, and you're going to have people that they choose to be renters. It gives them the flexibility that they want in their life, not being tied down to a 30-year mortgage. And as that, as you get more and more Class A properties and mid-rises in some of these, secondary and tertiary markets, I think you're going to see more and more of the need for what we do. So I think you're going to see it kind of expand a little bit to some of these, I'd say second-tier cities. And then, then I think the technology will catch up, and, you might see it go away. I think there'll probably still be a need or a want for like a concierge service. I think that's definitely, we want to work with people who want to work with us. And if that's because of the level of service we provide that is beyond what you can find on Apartment List or Zumper, and by the way, I think Apartment List has the best site out there. That's actually, there's one other one that I think is pretty good too. Have you seen the Very Apt?
No, that's a new one to me.
VERYAPT.com. I think they were, like half the prop tech in the leasing world. I think they got their start in Boston. And a couple of their engineers have been picked up by, Zillow in the past couple of years. So I think they might be on their last legs, but their site is solid. So, but yeah, I just, I think there's always going to be somebody who wants that kind of white glove service. And, I think there's intangibles that a really good agent can bring to the market, bring to the consumer, that is just going to be really impossible for an ILS or a website to do effectively. I mean, me personally, this is how I look at the market. The neighborhood 9 times out of 10 is more important than the building. I can find the same apartment in 5 different neighborhoods, the exact same unit with, very similar finishes. But it's the type of life and the, what you do for leisure, where you work, the vibe of the neighborhood that you want, that, I think every attempt at lifestyle search that I've seen has failed. And that's across, the leasing side as well as the sales side. I just, I don't know that the technology can replace the intangibles that an agent actually brings to the table.
Cool. Well, I love those bold predictions. Reid, anything else before we let Jason go?
Well, I'll double down on the awareness. Like, I don't disagree. I don't know if I'd say it's the locator, like it goes as far as saying that they'll benefit or be part of that expansion before the explosion. I love that comparison, by the way, Jason. But I totally agree with you as far as the shift in the housing industry. I think that's becoming clearer and clearer, and don't see that reversing course anytime soon.
Yeah.
What I see as a big opportunity is somebody with obviously the pockets of a co-star, I don't know, venture backed, but going all in on this opportunity while it does very much still exist before technology closes that opportunity or narrows it. Meaning if you were to have a apartments.com, but it was just locators, it was only about locators, and they had the network, right? They had the sales force, the brokers, as you were talking about, the volume of agents that you had. That would be pretty interesting, because again, as I look back at the first half of my adult life, I had no clue. And I look today and I don't know how that would change. Like if I was in an apartment today looking for another one, I don't think I would probably even think twice about hiring a locator or engaging with one. And so it puts a lot of pressure on you guys independently, kind of bottoms up. As you were saying, it's no picnic, it's no science on how you develop the leads. But if you had enough deep pockets, you could do what I would think would be some heavy, consumer, like direct to consumer marketing, which is super important. And then also that other client you talked about, which is I would go very aggressively at all the big PM companies. And then you could have a huge explosion of locator business. But as long as you guys are fighting it kind of as franchisors, I don't know that you're going to get anywhere near the piece of the opportunity that you could.
No, I would agree with you, Reid. And to bring it back to the former company before they imploded, I shepherded that deal between my former company and Zumper to the finish line for exactly the reason you were talking about. I thought there was a huge opportunity with their monthly traffic to really do some damage. And but it seemed like, in the last 2 years that they were, operating the company, their goal was to really cut the agent out, not to really capitalize on that business. And, but I agree. I mean, CoStar seems to have unendingly deep pockets. Didn't the SEC just smack them down though?
Well, if you're talking about on the rent path, I had not seen that. Dave and I have been kind of on pins and needles at this point now, 6 months since that was announced. So I don't know if that's what you're.
Yeah.
Or you're talking SEC. So maybe I wasn't reading that right.
One of the regulatory agencies just put a roadblock into that acquisition like last week sometime.
Huh. Wow.
Yeah.
Dave, did you know that? I hadn't heard that.
I didn't hear that on the Digible podcast yet, so that's where I get my news.
Me too. Which explains why I'm so out of the loop.
I'll shoot you guys over the article when we get off the call here. I sent it to a couple people, last week sometime. So I know I have access to it, but I'll shoot it over to you after the podcast. All right.
Cool.
Yeah, no, I see it now. Like 8 days ago, FTC used to block CoStar. Wow, that's really interesting. Yeah, shoot us over. I'd love to learn more. Well, man, Jason, this is super fascinating. I feel like you could definitely do a master class on locators. I think I also love all of the bold predictions that you have, and also like creative business models. I mean, Reid and I are not one to shy away from the norm when it comes to a business model. So I am definitely pulling for you guys. And we know a number of folks in the Chicago area. So as that, obviously as we have conversations with them, we'll know to recommend that they get on your calendar. But is there anything else that you would want the listeners to know before we get out of here?
I don't think so. I, thoroughly enjoyed the conversation, and, looking forward to seeing it once you guys doctor it all up. And, like I said, I appreciate the invite, and, you guys thinking that I had something to offer you.
Yeah, well, you give us too much credit to think that we do much doctoring over here. I mean, I'm lucky it gets uploaded right now. Oh man. Well, thanks,
Absolutely.
Jason.
Take care, guys.
All right. Take care, Jason.